Welcome to the Under 8 podcast, a 3 times per week college basketball podcast brought to you every week, 3 times a week in under 8 minutes. At the time of recording, it is Tuesday, March 5th at 9:33 p.m. My name is Josh Doring. Josh Molnix is not here today, but on today's pod, Purdue wins an outright Big Ten regular season title. Florida puts up 105 points on Alabama, and Dartmouth's players vote to unionize. It's all right now on the Under 8 podcast. No surprise, it is Purdue outright Big Ten regular season champions. Had already clinched a share of the title heading into their trip to Champaign. Boilermakers come out with a 77-71 victory to end the Big Ten title race, claim it outright. Not too much on the game itself because I want to talk about the bigger picture here. But even as Purdue was struggling to get going a little bit, not necessarily shooting the ball all that well, I was still looking at the box score going, they look like the better team here. It seems like they're going to find a way to do this. There just weren't that many areas where Illinois had clear advantages. You throw in the fact that even with Marcus Domask having a big second half to kind of keep him in the game, making some huge plays, he and Terrence Shannon still only had 31 points on 11 of 29 shooting. Most of that was Domask, who ended up having a very good game because of the shots he made late. Terrence Shannon really struggled. It's just not enough to beat Purdue. Now, Purdue did build a lead here, and then led by Domask, Illinois fought back, and then Purdue delivered again and again to finally clinch this win. And that is the one thing I do want to focus specifically on in this game. I have been as quick as anybody to point out the situational mistakes and shortcomings Purdue has had this season. Still don't have an incredible amount of confidence in a possession-by-possession standpoint in these really close games. I've been hard on Braden Smith's decision-making, and so it's only fair that with a outright title on the line, when they show up and answer, I got to give them credit. It was Braden Smith, Lance Jones knocking down threes. They just made the plays. They didn't get rattled when Illinois made the run to cut, I think it was at 6, and it looked like Purdue was going to handle it from there, and then all of a sudden Illinois goes on a 6-0 run to tie the game. Weren't phased, made big shot after big shot. A mistake here or there, but generally they played really, really well down the stretch. Deserved to win this game. So got to give props to him for that. That's something you haven't seen all that often with this team that you don't necessarily associate with them is strong finishes, convincing final 2-4 minutes of the game. That's what happened here. Now to the bigger picture for a minute. The last Big Ten team on the men's side to be repeat outright champions was Ohio State back in 2005, 2006, and 06-07. That's how long it's been. Unless I missed something, since the Big Ten tournament on the men's side was started in 1998, no team has ever won an outright regular season title, won the tournament, and then come back and won the outright title again the next season. Teams have gone outright Big Ten title, tournament, but have not sandwiched the tournament between two Big Ten outright titles. And no team has ever won outright both tournaments in 2 consecutive years, which obviously Purdue now has a chance to do if they win the Big Ten tournament. Basically, what they are doing is unprecedented in the history of the Big Ten. To a certain extent, I don't care what happens in the NCAA tournament. Of course, that's part of the legacy here. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do, how they respond from last year, all of that. And I do believe they're a significantly better team. And I've said that from the beginning of the season, and I stand by that. I picked them to win the national championship. I still feel pretty good about that. There's going to be more time to dissect all of this, and Josh and I have this conversation, it seems like every year now with Purdue. But I want to look at the positive of this. We're going to have time if they don't make it to the Final Four, if they don't win the national championship, to talk about that part of it. The single hardest thing to do in this sport is to win regular season titles, because it requires you to be consistent. It requires you to go in a bunch of hostile environments where all of these teams are circling you on the schedule as the favorites, as the team with Zach Edey, as the potential number one team in the country, all of that. You are the biggest game on everybody's schedule. And you have to do it night in and night out. We talk about this all the time, but 6 games is not enough of a sample size to determine much of anything. Any kind of weird things can happen over 6 games. Everything evens itself out over a regular season, over a full season. And Purdue has now won the Big Ten convincingly 2 years in a row. They just went into the building of the team that was trying to hold on for a share of the Big Ten title and beat them. No matter what happens in March, this has to be a big part of Zach Edey and this team's legacy, this group. When you talk about the 2 guards that came in last year and what they have done over the past 2 seasons. And this is Purdue, which is the other thing Matt Painter doesn't get enough credit for. You do not have the same natural appeal and resources as some of the other elite programs in the Big Ten. But Matt Painter has turned Purdue into the best program in the Big Ten. If they win this Big Ten tournament, have dominated this conference in a way nobody has since the Big Ten tournament started. This is a remarkable accomplishment that cannot be tainted by whatever happens in March. That is a different conversation. We'll have it in a couple weeks when it's time. The postseason is just different. So congratulations to Purdue. Give them the credit they deserve for this accomplishment. Now they get to finish out the regular season and see where we go in the postseason. Florida scored 105 points on Alabama. Alabama trying to hang in the SEC title race. Florida pretty much put an end to that, leaving South Carolina as the last team standing in Tennessee's way. Those two are going to meet tomorrow. We will definitely discuss that game on Thursday. So don't need to get too much into there. Let's just appreciate the fact South Carolina is the only team standing as a real competitor at this point to Tennessee, assuming Tennessee doesn't lose out here. But this back to the Florida-Alabama game. I'll start with the Alabama side and then get to the Florida side. Since beating this Florida team in overtime on February 21st, Alabama has given up 117 points to Kentucky, beat Ole Miss, lost to Tennessee on their home court, and given up 105 points to Florida. They have excused themselves from the SEC title race pretty much. Nate Oates is very, very frustrated with his team's lack of toughness. And this is not a scoring issue. They put up 87 on the road against a good team. Didn't shoot the ball particularly well. They are so good offensively that they don't even have to be an elite three-point shooting team to score. Because there have been years in the past where you go, oh, they only scored 62 points. Well, what happened? They were 4 of 20 from 3. They even have kind of created a solution to that, at least to a certain extent. But defensively, they are so bad that it just doesn't matter unless everything is clicking offensively and they score 100 points. This is not a formula to win game after game in the NCAA tournament, to go win day after day in the SEC tournament. Because somebody's going to have a good shooting game against you. Florida's got really good guards. Florida's a very good offensive team. Alabama simply has to be better defensively if they want any shot of making a deep run. They can take out anybody. Their ceiling is incredibly high, but the floor is low as well because they only have one dimension. They have one way to win. So I think Josh is on the same page with me here that I'm out on this Alabama team. I'm curious to see where they end up in the bracket because they might send somebody home earlier than they should go home. But I don't see how this team puts together enough wins to get to an Elite Eight, to get to a Final Four, unless Mark Sears is scoring 30, 35 points a game, which it's basically what he did in this one, and it still wasn't anywhere near enough. Or if they figure something out defensively. But I'm not holding my breath for that to happen because we're basically at the NCAA, we're basically at postseason time here. And they're still giving up 105 points here, 117 to Kentucky. Florida, somewhat quietly, in the last month, has lost 2 games. One of them was that overtime one to Alabama, which they just avenged emphatically. And the other was their regulation loss at South Carolina, who is having a very good season and is a very good team. They've lost once in regulation in the last month. They're playing better defense. Obviously, they're a really good offensive team. They're built from the guards first, which is usually a formula for success in the postseason. Todd Golden has figured something out here. I was not convinced that they were going to turn into this kind of team, but you combine where they're at right now, how well they're playing, with how close it could be to their resume and their record looking even better with some of the close games they lost early, where I remember saying at one point, it might just be one of those, it feels like Florida has a lot of these seasons under other coaches in particular, but where you believe in the talent, you feel like they're pretty good. They just kind of come up short time and time again. They just can't close the deal to get the wins that they need. And you feel like they just didn't realize their full potential. It looked like this season might be going that same direction early, but they have gotten things sorted out, particularly defensively, continued to evolve offensively. They are playing some really, really good basketball. And quite honestly, I like their chances of being a big factor in the NCAA tournament more than Alabama's at this point. They might just be a better basketball team at this point. We'll have to see how things go and how Alabama responds in the in the SEC tournament, But impressive win for Florida. They get their revenge on the earlier loss. And then finally, perhaps the biggest news of the day away from the court, but Dartmouth's men's basketball players have voted to unionize. I'm not going to go too deep on this because there are a lot of things that still need to happen. There are 400 different ways to have this conversation, but I want to make a couple points quickly before we get out here. First, let's just establish something here. Going back to Northwestern's football team attempting to unionize, there are at least some college athletes who want to be in a union. That is an important baseline fact to establish here. Because I've seen the NCAA president, Charlie Baker, say he's talking to all of these student athlete committees and they don't want to unionize. Maybe that is a general truth. General truth. A majority of players don't want to unionize. That could be true. But there are some that do. because Dartmouth just voted 13-2 to do so, and Northwestern football made an attempt a few years ago as well. And the school has already filed an appeal, so who knows how long this is going to take, whether it ends up in the Supreme Court, how high in the judicial system this goes, which is part of why there's only so much to say at this point, because there's a lot left to be determined. And you have all of these other court cases going at the same time. So this is just kind of evolving every day, and who knows where this all goes long term. A couple other points I want to get to here. There is a significance that I don't want to be overlooked about this coming from an Ivy League school, because Dartmouth getting the go-ahead to have this vote has a very important significance, because the legal approval saying that they are eligible to unionize, that they constitute as a union, did not come from NIL or some kind of financial compensation, saying that they're getting paid as employees in the way that we typically think of it. The legal justification here is that all of the compensation in terms of swag and the stuff that comes with being a college athlete makes them employees. Right? This is not about the typical, okay, they're all of this money that you're getting paid to go to school, all the NIL stuff. Because if Ivy League athletes are employees, every college athlete is an employee. There is no distinction to be drawn about if athletes fall under these certain categories in terms of NIL or scholarships or specific types of compensation, because I would argue the Ivy League is easily the closest thing we have to a true student athlete. And part of I saw that I believe it was Dartmouth's rationale in their statement was, I'm summarizing, but basically it's preposterous to suggest that our student athletes are primarily here for athletic reasons, because this is an Ivy League school. Sports are not the priority. So if this group has the go-ahead, and they do, to be able to vote to unionize, that means everybody, based off of this ruling, these legal proceedings, has the same right. It's not like this is Kentucky or some kind of, pick whatever school you want. It's an important baseline to start with. And then the second thing, the easiest solution here, with all of the different ways that that the NCAA is being pressured and things are continuing to be challenged in terms of what rights athletes have and are athletes employees, all of this different stuff that's going on right now legally. The easiest solution is for the federal government to step in, for Congress to pass some kind of law that sorts all of this out to provide clarity. That is the easiest solution. It's why the NCAA has been asking and begging for Congress to step in. However, it is not the federal government's job to come in and clean up the mess created by the NCAA. And I don't want us to lose sight of that. The NCAA fought and fought and fought to resist NIL, to resist other types of compensation, to resist now this union attempt. Any kind of major reform it took all of this pressure in order for it to happen, where basically the NCAA was kind of forced into a corner and didn't feel like they had a choice. And now we're seeing all of this, legal stuff coming that is doing the same thing, forcing the NCAA's hand, potentially at least, depending on how all the rulings go. In all of this, just don't forget that the NCAA could have handled all of it differently. They chose not to. These are the consequences. Maybe maybe Congress steps in and bails them out, or just decides this is out of control. Somebody needs to do something, and we have the ability to. But there needs to be accountability for the NCAA that they did not proactively try and create a framework for at least some of this stuff. And we've talked about this before. We talked about this when NIL came in and the transfer portal and all of that. Now, maybe you draw the line at unionization and say that's where we're going to make our stand. Different conversation. Had that been the case. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people fighting tooth and nail to just continue to push back the NCAA and to continue to get athletes more of the benefits and compensation that they deserve because of all of this money that they make the NCAA. There's a lot of difficult questions. This is all complicated. That's okay. That can be true, and it can also be the right thing to do, is to figure it out. And it's not the athlete's problem that there are some real challenges associated with some of this stuff. If teams are able to unionize with all of the NIL stuff, with the transfer portal, that's not the player's fault. It's on the NCAA more than anybody else. So as all of this continues to go, just don't forget that part of it. One last thing I do want to mention quickly, both Duke and North Carolina, one in more convincing fashion than the other, take care of business to set up a massive showdown Saturday. Duke only one game back in the ACC, so we will be playing for, in North Carolina's case, an outright ACC title, in Duke's case, a share of the ACC regular season title. This game delivers almost always without anything at stake, but now you've got top 10 teams, ACC title on the line. Can't ask for much more in that one. Really good set of games to end the regular season. We'll talk about that more when we get there. That is the Under 8 podcast for Tuesday, March 5th, recorded at 9:56 p.m. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your shows. Follow the Under 8 pod on Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. Thanks so much for being here. We will see you Thursday.